Hello there. My name is Robert Moore, and welcome to my channel. I just recently saw the Pinocchio remake directed by Robert Zemeckis and starring Tom Hanks as Geppetto, Benjamin Evan Ainsworth as the eponymous wooden head, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt as the insect-turned-conscious Jiminy Cricket. In all honesty, I'm not the biggest fan of the live-action Disney remakes. I see them mainly as a way for Disney to cash in on the nostalgia and familiarity of their old classics, like they've been doing for years with stuff like the Disney Vault and the direct-to-DVD sequels. In a vacuum, I guess they could be fine if you don't compare them to their originals, but comparisons are usually inevitable, especially when they change so little that you kinda wonder why you should watch them when the animated classics are still available on Disney Plus. But with all that said, this one is okay. I didn't hate it, but I also didn't love it, even without comparing it to the original. First, the stuff I liked. This movie seems to have a few changes rather than just copy the story line for line. Geppetto is good, and I like his opening monologue. With just a few lines and camera work, you understand what he's talking about and who he is referring to. I like how Pinocchio has a bit more agency in this compared to the original. In the scene where he is locked in a cage and he and Jiminy have to get him out, the Blue Fairy doesn't come in to save them. Rather, they get out themselves, which is a welcome change in my eyes. Speaking of which, the fairy is just fine. The actor Cynthia Ervio is doing her best with what she has. I don't think the character has the same stoic wisdom as the animated version, but she does well enough. I don't find her completely obnoxious, and she serves her purpose as the character that gives Pinocchio life and sets him on his mission of becoming a real boy. In this version, she sings part of When You Wish Upon a Star, which is sung well, I guess, but it replaces Jiminy's entire Give a Little Whistle song, which is a change that I didn't exactly like. I also like the set design for Pleasure Island. It looks nice, though I think it loses some of its teeth since they can't show alcohol or smoking in a kids' movie, but they do have elements of jackassery, like with the area where they break things. I also kinda like the new character they introduced, Fabiana, played by Cayenne Lamea, though her contributions to the story don't really add a whole lot. She acts friendly to Pinocchio when they meet in Stromboli's show, and I thought this would lead to her helping Pinocchio escape. They even allude to this, but they end up not doing anything with it, and Pinocchio ends up escaping himself with Jiminy's help, as I explained before. I also really like that some of his storytelling is done with the visuals, like the scene where Geppetto makes his wish, and when Jiminy finds out what happened to the kids in Pleasure Island. We already know what did happen, and it adheres to the number one rule of filmmaking: show, don't tell. With all that said, this movie has its problems. Jiminy Cricket can be pretty obnoxious in this. In the beginning, he starts off the story by narrating to us like in the animated version, but then he also has an argument with his past self, which I didn't find funny to be honest. In this version, they cut out Jiminy's Give a Little Whistle song, which established his relationship with Pinocchio as his moral guide. I didn't particularly enjoy that change all that much. Speaking of changes I didn't particularly enjoy, in this version he actually succeeds in sending Pinocchio to school, but doesn't go in with him. I'm just thinking, dude, you're his conscience. You gotta stay with him. Just hide in his pocket or something. And yeah, this movie does introduce the concept of if Pinocchio actually did go to school, and it ends up with him being kicked out of school anyway, which just shows that Geppetto's idea to send a puppet to school was really kinda dumb. Is homeschooling not a thing, Geppetto? The movie also has this weird subplot involving Geppetto's clocks, where he doesn't want to sell any of them because they mean that much to them, until the ending where it's mentioned that he sold them off screen to get that boat to find Pinocchio. And that's the entire arc in a nutshell. I still wonder what that subplot was there for. Though, when we do see the clocks chime like in the movie, there are a ton of in-jokes in them, so I guess I understand their worth. That's the other big problem I have with this. Things happen off screen or just come out of nowhere that could have been useful to have been seen established. For example, the new character I mentioned comes back near the ending to explain that Stromboli was thrown in jail, and I'm just caught off guard that they sprang that on us at the last minute. The same thing with the Pleasure Island subplot. Instead of establishing it with Honest John and Gideon speaking with the coachman and them convincing Pinocchio to go on the coach with the other boys, in this version Pinocchio and Jiminy are just scooped up and placed on the coach to Pleasure Island as it comes straight out of nowhere. I know what it is, and I know where they're going, of course, but I still would have liked something of a lead in, like maybe Honest John and Gideon finding Pinocchio and convincing him here as well. Speaking of, I also don't like Honest John and Gideon in this version. They did have one gag I laughed at when I saw that Gideon had different sized mallets. I found that funny and how cartoony it was, but that's really it. First of all, like in the original, they're just walking around in the street with no one finding it odd that a fox and a cat are just walking around in the street like people in broad daylight. Also, human hands on an animal work in cartoons, but in live action, they just look uncanny. They pretty much repeat what they say in the original almost word for word, but with a few references to influencers and Chris Pine. Timeless. I was kind of waiting to see if they would get some kind of comeuppance, like maybe they would be arrested and thrown in prison, which was the original plan for them in the animated version, but we never hear of them again. Going back to Pleasure Island, it doesn't seem like Pinocchio is as tempted as he is in the animated version when he's there, which I kinda like since, again, it gives him his own sense of agency, but he still turns into a donkey, which I don't get because the movie doesn't show him making a jackass out of himself. Lamprecht's transformation is fine, by the way, not as traumatizing as when it happened to his animated counterpart, but without comparing it to that, it's alright. Monstro is another subplot that is forced like the Pleasure Island scene. Geppetto doesn't get swallowed by Monstro, at least not right away, but both him and Pinocchio get immediately swallowed when they reunite. They also give him these tentacles, which I'm like, wow, couldn't figure out that he was a monster without those, I guess. All in all, this movie is fine. It has a few changes I like, and some scenes are done well enough in live action, and when it does deviate from the original, some of its changes are welcome. But every time it goes out of the box, it just crawls right back in, or it goes out of the box in odd ways that don't seem to work, much like the other Disney remakes. It's not a bad movie, but not a good movie either. It's just meh. Just another example of Disney trying to capitalize on nostalgia and people's recognition of their brand. I give this a 5 out of 10. Favorite moment? Geppetto and Pinocchio reunite. I like how Pinocchio recaps his entire day and all the adventures that he's gone through, and Geppetto just responds by shouting, "You did all that in one day?" It genuinely got a laugh out of me. That's all for today. My name is Robert Moore, and thank you for listening.